Hello and welcome to this Astranti bite-sized video, and today we're looking at an extract from one of our tuition videos. Now this is an E2 tuition video, but actually what we're going to be looking at is information that's going to be useful for any of you CIMA students, whether you're studying for your certificate level, your E1s, or your E2s, or even your E3s. And that's because what we're talking about today, what we're discussing, is a definition of a term, stakeholders. Now, I'm sure we're all kind of aware of what the term means, but what we're going to do in this video is to make sure that you absolutely know what stakeholders means, because if you do, then it's going to be much easier to be able to understand things like Mendelow's matrix, and when you're at E3 level, it's going to be much easier to understand the difference between a traditional business model and an ecosystem. So let's get stuck into today's video and answer the question, what exactly are stakeholders? Well, stakeholders are any parties that have some kind of interest in the business and can either affect the business or be affected by the activities that the business undertakes. So, for example, let's think of a publicly funded school. Who would the stakeholders be at the school? Well, quite quickly we might come up with a list that says teachers, pupils, the pupils' families and parents, the admin staff, and the local educational authority who have some kind of regulatory control over the school. All of these groups can obviously affect the school's strategy and policies or be affected by the school's strategy and policies. So is this the limit of a publicly funded school's stakeholders? Well, no. It would also include the teachers' unions, because the teachers' unions could organise a strike if they didn't agree with the school policies. It would also include the wider community, because if the school's very good, it can mean house prices rise, or if it's bad, it may mean house prices aren't so good. It can affect local businesses, because there's some relationship between businesses and schools, aren't there? For example, the local businesses may offer work experience to the school's pupils or internships to the school's pupils. Also, the local council, because the local council will run other services that will be used by pupils that are going to require collaboration with the school. Another group of stakeholders may be local schools. The schools might be trying to compete with each other to try to get the best grades, because if they get the best grades, then more pupils will be attracted to their school. The local media is another group of stakeholders. They're going to report on the school. That reports may be favourable or unfavourable depending on what happens at the school. Exam boards are another group of stakeholders, because schools have to hold exams based on the rules that the exam boards set. And the government is another group of stakeholders, because they decide how much of the national budget goes towards education, and surely we can see the direct implication that would have for the school's strategy. So there we go. A list of lots of stakeholders that you may not have immediately thought of, but it's important to know that this is not an exhaustive list. And the brief examples of how I've said that the stakeholders may be affected or affect the school are also not the only ways that this could happen. So that's the stakeholders of a publicly funded school. Now let's turn our attention to the stakeholders of a business rather than a not-for-profit. And what I would like you to do now is spend some time examining who you think the stakeholders for a low-cost airline such as Ryanair would be. And while you're doing that, I want you to consider what those stakeholders' interests are. Now, once you've finished, you can unpause me and we can take a look through the list that I've written and see if there's any you've missed, or perhaps I've missed some that you've got down. Okay, so pause me now. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to do that. And what I want you to do now is just to run through these with me and see how many you got. So I've got the CEO, who we talked about earlier. We've got the funders behind Ryanair. We've got trade unions, employees, airport suppliers, competitors, customers, environmental groups, and charity partners. Now don't worry, I'm not just going to leave it there. Let's go through it now just to make sure we can see the link between these groups of people and businesses and Ryanair. So let's start with the CEO. Now in 2019, Michael O'Leary was the Chief Executive Officer of Ryanair and had a significant amount of shares. And so Michael O'Leary could both affect and be affected by Ryanair's strategy and policies. We saw earlier, didn't we, if Ryanair hit certain profit targets, then Michael O'Leary was going to benefit in the form of a massive bonus. So that's how he's going to be affected by Ryanair's strategy, because if they chose a poor strategy and they didn't hit their profit goals, then the CEO's not going to make that bonus that he wanted. But of course, the CEO also has a lot of power in an organisation and can shape the strategy of an organisation. So if they don't do it well, also that can affect the direction of the company. Now we've got the funders, who in this instance are Irish Air, and don't worry, I wasn't expecting you to know that off the top of your head. Quite simply, the stakeholders here are the investors, people providing finance, and in Ryanair's case, Irish Air provided a loan as well as equity to Ryanair in return for shares. Now that means that they are shareholders, and so they of course are going to be interested in the performance of the company, which can be affected by the organisation's strategy and policies. Now, as shareholders also, they are going to have voting rights which could shape the strategy and policies of Ryanair. The next group of stakeholders I wrote down are trade unions. Now, some of Ryanair's employees in certain countries such as England and Italy are eligible to join a union if they wish. Now, trade unions, just as we saw with the teachers, are able to affect the policies and strategy of Ryanair because they can take strike action if they do not feel that the strategy and policies of Ryanair are not fairly affecting their members. So let's imagine hypothetically, for example, that Ryanair slashed the cabin staff's wages by 30%. Well, then of course the trade unions could organise a strike which could ground Ryanair's planes, which could mean that Ryanair is not making any money, so it's not hitting its profit goals, and etc, etc, etc. Okay, our next group of stakeholders are employees. Now, I've just talked about how the employees can be affected by Ryanair, but in the terms of how it would impact a trade union. But of course, employees of a business are obviously affected by an organisation's strategy and policies, and depending on their position within an organisation, they too can affect the organisation. Now here's a funny one that you might not have got. I think all the rest are fairly obvious. The CEO and the financiers and the trade unions and the employees, but airports, how can airports be stakeholders? Well, the airports themselves are really interested in the strategy and policies of Ryanair, because if Ryanair chooses to fly to them, it's going to bring lots of revenue to the airports, both from Ryanair directly and from their passengers. Another group of stakeholders are suppliers. Now, Ryanair is going to have a load of different suppliers, from the people that supply the onboard food to the manufacturers or the lessors of the planes. Now, all of them would be affected by Ryanair's strategy and policies, because Ryanair could decide to use one of their competitors, or they could decide to double their orders with the suppliers. Each decision would impact drastically on the supplier's business. Okay, the next group of stakeholders are the competitors, because of course they too are going to be affected by Ryanair's strategy and policy choices. Let's imagine, for example, Ryanair cut its pricing structure even further, so it's offering really cheap tickets. Well, then its competitors' strategy would also probably have to change to try and meet the new policy Ryanair has set. And of course, the competitors' strategy would also affect Ryanair's. Customers are a vital stakeholder group, because if they don't use Ryanair anymore, that's definitely going to dramatically alter Ryanair's strategies and policies. Let's imagine, for example, that a low-cost airline like Ryanair decided to change its policy and become a more expensive airline, offering lots more extras. Now, that could mean it loses its existing customer base, but it could mean that it gains a new one. Now, that's an extreme example, but it does demonstrate what an important group of stakeholders customers are. Environmental groups are another group of stakeholders, because organisations can face opposition by external pressure groups. Now, in the case of Ryanair, many environmental groups are seriously unhappy with flights as a method of transportation because it's such a high polluting form of transport. And the final group of stakeholders that I've got down, but remember, this is not an exhaustive list of all of Ryanair's stakeholders, but the last one we've got are the charity partners. Now, Ryanair has a number of charity organisations that it supports financially. And of course, if Ryanair did badly, it may not be able to support them financially anymore, and so the charity could be in trouble. So, of course, the charity partners are very interested in Ryanair's strategies and activities. Okay, so there we go. Everything that you need to know about stakeholders to start off your CIMA studies. And as I said at the beginning of this video, this is an extract from one of our tuition videos. So be sure to check out the Astranti website if you want to see more tuition videos. We've got subjects or videos on every subject listed in the CIMA syllabus. But of course, we don't just have videos, we've also got things like study texts or mock exam questions, which really help set you up for your actual exam. So thank you very much for watching today. If you want more of these videos, be sure to like and to subscribe to our channel, and good luck with your exams.